I'm going to talk about the effects of COVID-19 on airlines, and I'll take as a case in point Air Canada, but I'll take a look also at the global picture. I'll then talk about travel-related industries because it's not just airlines; it's also restaurants, it's hotels, it's taxis, it's Uber, and so on. Then I'm going to talk about why is COVID-19 a wicked problem, which means it's very, very difficult to deal with, and it needs to coordinate, in this case, across the globe. Then what are the policy questions that governments needs to deal with? And I'll finish by summarizing what I'm talking about. So airlines, when I take a look at Air Canada happened to be in the perfect storm. First, they had to deal with the 737 MAX crisis, where all airplanes of that type had to be grounded. And that's a major airplane for Air Canada. And so it was grounded from March 2019 to November 2020. And then COVID happened. And because of COVID and because of the 737 MAX crisis, the flights did not resume when the 737 problem was fixed, but only at February 1st, 2021. So Air Canada, which I'm going to take a look at the numbers very quickly in a second, is only one of the airlines, but all airlines face the same problems. One, there were travel restrictions. Governments restricted movement from one place to another. They added requirements. Recently, I had to fly to Israel, and I had to deal basically with a folder of forms I had to actually provide traveling there and coming back. The other problem is, even without the restrictions, customers are afraid to fly. It's not clear that this is a short-term problem, as I'm going to talk about that. It might be actually a permanent problem that we have to deal with. The other problem that they face, airlines, is that one of the major segments of business, of their business, is business travel. But businesses have discovered something amazing. You don't need really to travel to a place to run a business conference. You can do that online. And as such, I think this is going to be a permanent change for the airline industry, and they need to deal with that and think about what they're going to do next. The other problems, and of course, this is a result of what I've talked about until now, airlines had to lay off their employees because the business has been declining. But now, recently, they had to lay off employees because they had employees who refused to be vaccinated, which gets, again, to different parts of the problem of COVID-19 that is all interrelated with each other. So if we take a look at Air Canada numbers, the numbers are actually scary. Between 2020 and 2019, the revenues dropped from $19 billion roughly to about 5.8. And then in 2021, it got worse, where in the first 9 months of 2020, it was $5 billion of revenue, and then it became 3.7 in 2021. The same problem occurs in operating income. In 2019, they had $1.7 billion of operating income. In 2020, they had a loss of $3.8 billion. And then we can see that also in the first 9 months of 2020 and 2021, that an operating loss. The picture gets grim again when we look at net income. And one of the major things that I track when I look at businesses is operating cash flows, which is the cash flows from core business that actually in 2019 were positive, $5.7 billion. In 2020, they were negative $2.4 billion. And in the first 9 months of 2021, we're talking actually at a worse picture than the same 9 months in 2020. It went down from 1.6 billion deficit to $2 billion. So this is actually a result of the problem they've been facing. And so basically, we need to take a look not just at Air Canada, we need to take a look at the global pictures. And so the numbers I have comes from ICAO, which is a UN-related agency. And we can see that in 2020, the seats offered dropped by 50%. And in 2021, they were estimated to drop further by 34%. 66% reduction in international passengers in 2020, and 38% in domestic passenger, and further drop in 2021. And the issue is, of course, that not only airlines are part of the travel industry, it's also hotels, it's also restaurants, it's taxis, it's Uber, it's everything. So when you look at tourism, the ICAO estimated that international tourism revenue declined by $1.3 trillion in 2020 compared to 2019. And when we look at Canada, based on Statistic Canada, the impact on tourism GDP was basically a drop by 48%, and similar on tourism, similar effects in tourism spending in Canada in that year. Now, why is COVID-19 a wicked problem? Because it turns out that, like every wicked problem, it's very complex, and attempt to solve a part of that might exacerbate it somewhere else. So one of the problems we face is that not all nations have equal access to vaccines. And it turns out that one of the major weapons in combating COVID-19, which of course the real issue is getting the economy basically back on track, is that unless we would vaccinate basically all nations, we will have mutations and variants being developed and being exported to somewhere else. Because again, we're living in the 21st century. It's easy to actually get on a plane and get it somewhere. And once you get a patient zero coming from somewhere to somewhere else, the genie is out of the bottle. Studies have found that we cannot do much once it's happening. And so we need to deal with vaccination with the rest of the world. The other things that happens, that there is an arms race between vaccines and variants. And as such, COVID-19 will remain with us in the foreseeable world, in the foreseeable future. And we need to deal with it. And we need to think about that. And we need to coordinate the efforts in dealing with that, because unless we deal with that, we won't be able to actually deal with the problems of, say, the travel industry. But the travel industry is only one of the industries that are being impacted. And so there need to be a coordinated international effort to deal with this issue. Now, then we need to get to the government. Should the government help, say, the travel industry? Say we talk about the Canadian government. Should the government help the corporations or employees? Now, should they help Air Canada? One could argue, as I show in my article, that some of the cash flow problems in Air Canada were made by Air Canada by spending so much money on repurchasing shares from the public. They actually reduced their ability to run operations under tight cash flow. And so as such, the issue that the government should ask themselves is, do we give money to businesses? Do we give it to employees? And there we get to another problem. You give it to employees as what? As unemployment? If that's the case, I mean, people are refusing to go back to work for restaurants, because the difference between what they were paid before and what they are paid now under unemployment is not that much. So again, we have a problem here. The other question is, if some of these issues are permanent, what are we doing? Aren't we better off actually retraining people to move to different industries? Because, for example, look at restaurants. Clearly, the restaurants that succeed under COVID-19 are the ones that moved to delivery and take out model. Now, if that's the case, do you really need to have prime real estate in Toronto? Do you need to have serving staff? And if you have serving staff, is it at the same amount that you had before? Do you need to have a very expensive chef? Maybe you're better off operating from a ghost kitchen, which basically means that the composition of your staff and the real estate you are in is different. So if you're in the restaurant business as an employee, the question is, are you going to have the same number of jobs in the future? And if not, what should you do in the future? And as such, governments should actually think about the future and ask themselves, are we better off providing money to people? Are we better off retraining them? So let me summarize what I talked about. And of course, you can read more about that in my article. The disruption in the travel industry due to COVID-19 has been dramatic and is expected to last for some time. Some of these effects might be permanent, which makes it, again, very difficult in terms of policy. And there are some serious questions that governments need to address in relation to what kind of support they can provide to the travel industry and how effective it's going to be. Thank you for listening to me. I'll be more than happy to discuss any of that offline.